Hi friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about useEffect hook in React. In fact, I've already created one video on useEffect, but this one is more likely I wanted to discuss about the brackets that's being used within the useEffect. So we'll talk about that, and I'll also post the link for the previous video in case you have not seen that video in the video's description. Now, fundamentally, the useEffect hook is used to fetch or get data from any API. If you have worked with the class-based components, it's just like a component mount that could be used to do the initial task like fetching of any data, setting up of any like data variables or some initial stuff. And fundamentally, the useEffect is used without those bracket arrays also. Sometimes you might have seen, and sometimes you might have seen there are two bracket arrays that's being used out here. Now fundamentally what happens is when you use useEffect, now useEffect is initially loaded, like means when the page gets loaded, the DOM gets loaded, it actually gets rendered, and then whenever there is a change in the state, so this useEffect is always loaded out. Now this particular bracket has a significant use in it. If you use this bracket with some variable, it means we are restricting the re-rendering of the data or this useEffect based upon any change. Let's say there is a variable called as count. So whenever there is a change in the count, we are going to ask to re-render the useEffect. But if there is no change in the count, then this useEffect would only be loaded one time when the initial page gets loaded, but it is not gonna be re-rendered again and again. In fact, only and only if there is a change in the state of count variable, then this re-render would occur. So that's exactly the purpose of this array. You could pass multiple variables based upon which you really want to kind of go ahead with that useEffect. So rather than wasting more time on this, I'll practically show you and demonstrate how we could use a normal useEffect and how you could pass on a variable to actually control the re-rendering of this particular useEffect on a state change. So let's see friends how we could use the useEffect to actually deal with the initial loading of the stuff within the React app. And the useEffect hook, technically we are going to demonstrate how we could use those array brackets to kind of load only or re-render only once there is a change in a special or a particular variable within the React app. So now in order to do certain things, I need to import, let's say React, and then I'll say useState, useEffect, and then from React. So that's one thing I need to do. The second thing is I'm gonna take another variable which is there. Let's say I'll use a use state, and I'll say let's use a variable called as count, and I'll say set count, and the initial value I'm just gonna use state is, let's say, 0. So that's one thing we need to set it out. Okay, now fundamentally what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna use useEffect, and then I'm gonna call this function inside that. So you want to load your data, you want to call a data from an API or anything, that's what you could do it over here. But let's firstly see how we could use this without those array brackets. So I'm not using any array brackets over here, so we'll use it. Firstly I'll demonstrate how it works before the array brackets, and then we'll actually see how it works with the another array bracket. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll in fact use another one. So we'll say, let's say, calculation, and we'll just say set calculation, and we'll just use useState, okay, 0. So that's there. Now what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna use set calculation, and I'm gonna use, let's say, a function out here, and I'll say count, plus 1, and I'll just multiply it by 10, let's say. So what is going to happen is it's actually going to push the count by 1 and then multiply it by 10. So that's what we are trying to do. Now I'll need some buttons to actually do so. So what I'm going to use over here is I'll say button class name is equal to button, let's say primary. I'm using a bootstrap so I can use those classes, and I'll just use on click, and on click I'm just gonna use the function which is, let's say, set count, because I want to set the state, and I'll say count plus 1. So that's what I'm gonna use it over here. And let's say we'll just use this, and I'll say click me. So this is something like this. We'll just set it up, and this is a button, and I just want to display the same information. You clicked, let's say the button. I'll just simply say count that times, and the calculation is, let's say, we'll just display the calculation. Now let's try running this app, and I'm actually running this within the browser. So set calculation is a variable which I'm actually having some problem with the set. Okay, so set calculation, I'll just copy that, paste it over here, which is fine. Now if you see, you click the button 0 times and the calculation is 10. Now why it happens is because the count is 0, and of course when it first time loads it, this useEffect hook actually calls it. It actually adds up a count which becomes 1 and then multiplies it by 10. So the value of the calculation is 10, displayed as 10, and the count variable, which is initially a 0, that's displayed over there. Now if I click on, so if I click this becomes 1, and 1 plus 1 because it recalls or it re-renders the useEffect. So count plus 1, 1 plus 1 becomes 2, 2 into 20, 2 into 10, 20. So that's why it becomes 20. Then I'll click one more time. So it becomes 2 and it is 30. Why so? Because this is called one more time again. So because when I click on, I'm changing the count, not the calculation, but this useEffect is always called, it's always re-rendered when there is a change in the state. So what is happening is we are actually multiplying it, like adding a count to 1 and then adding it and multiplying it by the 10. So if I keep on doing this, the count is incremented and then accordingly added 1 and then multiplied by 10 in the calculation variable. So that makes sense. Now if I just want to make a change over here, and I'll just say I want to make a change, or this should be re-rendered. So it means this is gonna execute one time initially when the page gets loaded, but then the useEffect hook would be called only once the calculation is actually changed. So if means there is some change in the calculation variable, then only the hook is gonna be, this is useEffect would be re-rendered. So if I refresh it back, I'll just refresh it. So this is the initial one, so 0, and then 0 plus 1, 10, because initially one time this would be called. So now if I click on, so you just see the calculation is not changed. Why? Because even if I set the count 2, so before that the useEffect was also used to re-render it, but now I have put up a condition. I say when there is a change in the calculation variable, only then this is gonna be re-rendered except the first time. So if you keep on clicking this, the count is gonna be increased, but the calculation is not gonna be increased. So that's how, guys, the array brackets within a useEffect has a special symbolic meaning. People tend to confuse it, and that's why I wanted to create a video and guide you out that why that particular bracket options are used within the useEffect. So I hope, guys, this makes sense. This clarifies a lot of concepts to you, and you could take it from here. Keep yourself updated and learning. I'll be coming back with more videos, so please stay tuned and have a good one.